I'm Adrian, the cruise and travel guy. Carnival Australia has just announced its 26-27 cruise itineraries, and apart from being much of the same, it's also a bit of a slap in the face for many of you. We all know by now that it was announced in early June that P&O Australia would be absorbed into the Carnival Australia brand. The full changeover happens next March 2025, but as part of that change, Pacific Explorer will be leaving the fleet in February 2025. Pacific Adventure and Pacific Encounter will then become Carnival Adventure and Carnival Encounter, but P&O and Carnival have both promised that the P&O experience, as you know, will remain on board after the transition. So everything you've come to expect and know of P&O Australia will still occur, it will just be under the Carnival branding. And yes, that does mean that we'll have 2 Carnival experiences in Australia. We'll talk about that next year when we see how that works out. Itineraries were previously announced up until the middle of 2026, and this morning, Carnival has announced the extension of that by about 12 months. So we now see the itineraries through to the middle of 2027. One of the issues that was relayed by many of you at the time of this announcement was you were curious about cruising from your local home cities outside of Sydney and Brisbane. Pacific Explorer was typically the ship that would be moved around, so she would sail out of places like Auckland, Fremantle, Adelaide, Melbourne, where Pacific Adventure and Pacific Encounter would sail exclusively out of Sydney and Brisbane. When the changes were announced, I specifically asked Carnival about this. I asked them if there would be consideration for cruises outside of Sydney and Brisbane, and their response was, as deployments beyond those published are planned, itineraries in all markets will be reviewed, which will include exploring other home port possibilities. Well, now with this morning's announcement of this further 12 months of cruise itineraries, we know that that's not the case. Carnival Adventure and Carnival Splendor will sail from Sydney year-round, Carnival Encounter from Brisbane year-round, and Carnival Luminosa will do her usual thing where she sails seasonally out of Brisbane during our summer months. From July 2026 through to June 2027, the collection of cruises is very much what we've seen in the past, including short getaway cruises to nowhere, cruises to Moreton Island, far north Queensland, New Zealand, the South Pacific, and a couple of main event cruises like those that go to the Melbourne Cup. Cruises from Queensland, however, will add Airlie Beach and Papua New Guinea itineraries to the mix. These are not available from Sydney. As for Luminosa, she will sail to San Francisco in April 2026, and that's available to book now. In September 2026, Luminosa will set sail from San Francisco to Tokyo. Predictably, there will be a future cruise available that will sail from Tokyo to Brisbane, but that is as yet unavailable. As for these new cruises between 26 and 27, Carnival says there are 201 available to book, and that represents a 99% increase over the 24-25 season, but I suppose that's quite easy when your fleet doubles. I was hopeful that when Carnival announced its new itineraries, it would be mindful of the millions of cruises that live outside of Sydney and Brisbane, but that disappointingly is not the case. I really did think that Carnival Australia would throw those living outside of Sydney and Brisbane a bone. The exit of Explorer leaves a big gap to fill, and although I don't imagine that itinerary planning is simple, cruise lines are notorious for doing this again and again. In this case, Carnival Australia is positioning itself as the only year-round operator of cruises. Let's exclude Princess because honestly, they send their ship away for 3 months or 4 months on its world cruise, and that isn't a viable option across our winter season for the majority of people. Frankly, I just think that Carnival owes Aussie cruises more than this. And let's not ignore that the states of WA and SA have recently been on a media spree advertising how much they are willing and wanting to accept cruising in their own backyards. They have the ports, they have the capabilities, they have the desire, and yet cruise lines, here in this case Carnival Australia, are not engaging with them. Overall, I think it's a disappointing showing from what is Australia's only year-round cruise line, and I do think that they owe us more than this, and they owe many of you more than this, because I do live in Sydney, so I have access to this, and many of us do, but I know, and I read it constantly from you guys that comment and send messages, that you don't live here necessarily and that you want options, because throwing in 5-hour flights across the country or even other domestic flights from other cities adds not only to the expense but to the hassle. And as much as you love cruising, at that point it starts to not become a viable holiday option, and I totally get that. Let me know how you feel about all of this. It has been a hot topic lately, and this is not what I was hoping this announcement would be. So let me know what your thoughts are. Whenever you're ready to book a cruise from Sydney or Brisbane, head to my website, thecruiseandtravelguy.com.au, and give me a follow on Facebook and Instagram at thecruiseandtravelguy. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you soon. Far out. I've just finished recording and I didn't press record. Cruises on Carnival Splendor and Carnival Adventure and Carnival Encounter will exclusively be cruises on what? Carnival Adventure and Carnival Encounter will sail from Sydney.